So here goes nothing. This is my first video. Never done this before, never really done anything like this before. So it's gonna be kind of a learning process for me. I want these videos to be a way that I can sort of experiment and explore interesting ideas through art, basically. The topic for today is going to be color. And I am very aware that an artist exploring the possibilities of color is far from original, but I want to take a little bit of a different approach to it. So I'm less interested in our emotional response to color or our conceptual response to color, and more sort of want to explore how we process color and how we perceive color. I started out by thinking about how color is used in art and what movements and forms of art use color in this way. The first thing that popped to mind was Pointillism. Most people are pretty familiar with Pointillism. So it's basically an art movement where the artist will use dots of color to create images. By making those dots small enough, the eye will blend them together when seen from a distance. And even though none of these colors are mixed, they're all separate dots, from a distance, our eye will blend them and it'll create sort of a cohesive image. The idea behind this movement was that by allowing your eye to blend the colors of paint, instead of pre-mixing them on a palette, the colors would be more vibrant and more, in the words of some of the founders of these movements, luminous, which just means bright, I guess. I don't really know. I was thinking about that, but that's been done to death, right? There have been plenty of pointillists. It's a movement that's like well over 100 years old. So I was thinking, what sort of interesting spin could I put on it? And my idea is, what if instead of having our eyes mix dots or squares or whatever shape you want to create more luminous colors, what if we use this same technique to kind of do the opposite? So I'm not going to get too into the specifics of color theory, right? I think probably most people watching this video have been to an art class. We know about the color wheel. Red and blue make purple, yellow and blue make green. But if you mix colors that are opposite to each other on the color wheel, you get brown. So red and green are across from each other on the color wheel. If you mix them, you get brown. Purple and yellow also cross from each other on the color wheel. You get brown as well. You get brown basically when you mix all three of the primary colors. So my question is, can I use different color combinations to reach the same brown? In theory, that seems like it should work, right? And by maybe placing dots of complementary colors next to each other, instead of getting more luminous color, we'll get brown. That's my goal. I want a painting that is made up of a bunch of vibrant colors when viewed close up, but when viewed from a distance, it all blends into sort of like the same brown, right? I want to preface this by saying, I don't know if your eye really works that way. I don't know if your eye is going to mix those colors the same way they would mix on a palette. The visual process might be kind of different. I honestly don't know. And also, I suspect that I'm probably not the first person to come up with this idea. Someone else has probably thought of this idea. That being said, I don't think I'm gonna research this topic. I don't want to look into the science behind it, and I don't really want to look into the art history behind it, because I want to figure it out for myself, right? I'm sure someone's tried this, maybe successfully, maybe not successfully. I'm sure someone studied this, and maybe this is possible, maybe it's not possible, but I want to do it on my own. And I don't want to be influenced by the other conclusions people have come to. We'll see. We'll see if it works. Even if it doesn't work, even if I can't get the effect I'm going for, I think I'm still gonna post it, right? Because even if the experiment is a failure, I still think it's worth exploring and worth sharing. Because sometimes failure can take us to interesting places, just like success can. I think for the background, I'm gonna pick a color other than white, because I think just blank white is gonna be kind of boring, and there will probably be at least a little bit of background showing through. Let's see, I've picked a color, it's around here somewhere. It's just a light ivory color, so it shouldn't really interfere with the painting. It'll give it a little more personality than just like a blank white slate. Now let's figure out what colors of paint we're going to use in our painting. The first step was to find some complementary colors. I used this tool on Canva to find a couple I liked. The next step was to find another pair of colors that would mix to make the same color as the first pair. For this step, I used this tool on colorkit.io to help visualize how the colors would mix and to adjust the levels of red, green, and blue to get the effect I was looking for. The last step was to figure out how to actually create these colors on a canvas. I'm not much of a painter and not very good at mixing colors, so I used this tool on Sensual Logic to help. There was a lot of back and forth throughout this process, and my color pairs changed several times, but eventually I landed on two pairs that I'll call Minty Brick and Manila Navy. Here's my progress so far on the painting. Just to make sure that the dots stay lined up, I put I'm not sure if you guys can see it that well, I put some guide lines. Now, the thing we gotta figure out is what the actual pattern's gonna be. I was looking at all these vertical lines, and for whatever reason I just saw a column, right? Like an ancient Greek or Roman column. I did a very rough sketch just to give me the right sort of general shape of I believe it's a Doric column. One of the earliest and most basic forms of a Greek column, although the Romans also used them as well. So pretty simple top. We have the sort of not really super educated on column anatomy, but the grooves down the length of the column, I just looked it up. It's called fluting. The grooves on a column are called fluting. And then a pretty simple base. All right, here we go. We have the canvas. I have my rough little sketch. Let's put the rough little sketch onto the canvas. Okay. So far, so good. I have the overall shape of the columns sketched out onto the paper. Now I need to add the fluting. I have sort of two ways I was thinking of doing this. One is could have an even, flat looking design where each of the flutes is the same size. It doesn't give much of a sense of depth or curvature to the column, but it is kind of like geometrically satisfying, I think. I also want to point out that I know this is in red and blue. The actual painting is not going to be in those colors. I made it different colors just so I can visualize the layers a little bit. The other possible design for the fluting on the column is sort of a more, oh, I think I got that upside down. Let's try that one more time. more of a curved looking design. So we have the fluting a little skinnier on the outside, moving to fatter in the middle. That kind of gives it the illusion of being a curved surface. And as nice as the flat design was, I actually kind of like this better. I am going to make one small change, which is that I think this middle groove is looking a little fat, a little husky. So I'm going to pinch it in a little bit, make it a little skinnier. This is by far my least favorite part of painting. Taping off the areas I don't want to paint is a very slow, boring process. But the clean lines we get from the tape will really make the final painting pop. It's tempting to cut corners to speed up this process, but doing a good job here will save me a lot of time cleaning up messy areas later. Before the painting can begin, I have to mix my colors. I did my best to follow the ratios I found for the colors I'm trying to make. I'm sure there are much more professional, respectable art tools I could use to mix these colors, but a measuring cup and spatula worked fine for this project. I mixed 4 colors in total, but I'm only showing 1. Take my word for it, the process for the other 3 looked pretty much the same. So I want to show you guys some of the progress I've made. I've experimented with a couple of different tools to speed up the process, right? Because if I make one dot at a time, it's going to be hard to get sort of a perfect uniform pattern, and it will also take a very, very long time. So I came up with some ideas for how to speed up the process. The first idea I came up with is here somewhere. So I decided to use some sort of skinny dowels. I glued them together so they'd be in sort of a uniform pattern, evenly spaced. I didn't want the dots to overlap each other, so you can see I have some even smaller dowels in between them. I know it's kind of a crude, rough tool, but it actually worked okay. So here's an example of one of the attempts I made. There's actually kind of an interesting effect to it. I think maybe you do get a little bit of that blending effect, just a little bit. You can still tell the different areas of color apart, but they do kind of blend from a distance. I'll show a little closer to the camera so you guys can see. My only issue was that the setup leaves a lot of white space, and I think the white space really interferes with the effect that I'm trying to go for. Unfortunately, I think just because of the shape of the dots, if I don't want them to overlap, there's gonna be white space, right? So I was thinking about how I can get a pattern that has less white in between. I decided to abandon the dots. I know that's sort of classic pointillism. Now we're moving into the world of divisionism. So divisionism works on the same principles of pointillism. Basically, small areas of color blended by your eye to make images. The difference with divisionism is that it's not limited to dots. So pointillism is all dots. Divisionism can also include areas of color that are square or blotchy or just irregular shapes. It can really be pretty much anything. This is my second tool I made. Hopefully with the squares, we'll get a little less white in between the areas of color, so the eye should probably blend them a little bit better when there isn't too much background color interfering. Okay, back to the painting. The first color combination I'm going to be using is Manila Navy. The taping is finally over, and the canvas is looking good. Now I get to move on to the fun part of the painting. So I've made a little bit of progress on the painting, and I gotta say, I'm not crazy about how it looks. It looks a little sloppy. I was hoping that the tool would make more of a consistent grid pattern. I think there's a little bit of maybe crookedness, wonkiness in the way that the tool is put together. I also think that probably some of this is human error and my hand just isn't steady enough to make like a perfect grid. The other thing is that I don't think these squares are small enough to really blend together when you take a look at them. So I gotta decide what to do. I wanted this to turn out sort of perfect, very precise, very accurate. But it didn't. And you know what? That's okay. Because we can sort of add to it. We can add texture to it, add another layer to it. It looks a little wonky, a little crazy, so I'm just gonna lean into that and make it look even crazier. I wanted it to be perfect, but perfection is boring. Chaos is fun, so let's introduce a little bit of chaos to the design. I started out by laying down some randomly placed dots across the canvas using a dowel. And this helped break up the wonky grid, but it also formed clumps of color that worked against the blending effect I was going for. So, I went back in and laid down a more regular grid of dots on top of the pre-existing grid of squares. This broke those large squares of color down into smaller areas, which will hopefully allow the viewer's eye to blend them more effectively. Something about the pattern still felt unbalanced, so I decided to add yet another layer. I took a bamboo skewer and broke it in half. I then used the pointy end to draw out some smaller dots to break up some of the clumps of color. I retaped the canvas, and now I'm ready to add in my final two colors, following the same process I used to paint the background. I enjoy using complicated textures and patterns in my art. Putting them together can be very repetitive, but to me it's kind of a meditative and calming process. No one mark is particularly beautiful or precise, but when these gestures are arranged in a recognizable pattern, and that pattern is repeated many times over, the individual markings no longer matter, and the image becomes more than the sum of its parts. I think the human brain is programmed to seek out patterns in its surroundings, and so when the viewer sees a painting or drawing with a new and unexpected pattern to it, there is a sense of discovery and people connect with it even if they don't normally spend a lot of time looking at art. After applying layer after layer of detail, the painting is nearing completion. All I have to do is paint in the last few dots, and we have a finished painting. So I put a lot of time into this painting, and it's finally done. It kind of seemed like it was never going to get finished. And that's kind of an issue with all kinds of art. It's kind of hard to say when something's finished. Pretty much any piece of art, you could work on it indefinitely, trying to fix little things, trying to clean stuff up. I reached a point where I thought it was as good as it's going to get. I'm sure I could fiddle with all these little details, but in the end, I don't think it's really going to add much to the art piece overall. So it's done. It's done. It's finally done. So let's take a look at the final painting. It's been a long process. I want to kind of assess the results. So, first question is, did I succeed in getting the effect I was looking for? There is kind of a certain amount of the patterns blending together, but do they form the same exact uniform color when viewed from a distance? I would say no. I think in that sense, it was a failure. But as I said earlier in this video, failure can sometimes take us to interesting places, and I think that's the case with this painting, because even though I didn't achieve the effect I was hoping I would achieve, I actually really like this painting. I think it looks very cool. The textures are interesting. I usually don't do geometric stuff like this, so that was kind of cool. I also like the colors. The color combinations are kind of unusual. They're colors I usually wouldn't put next to each other. It failed at its stated goal, but I think it kind of succeeded as a painting. So I told you from the beginning, even if it didn't work, I would post the results and I would post the process, and here it is. Now the question is, why didn't it work? I can think of a few possible reasons. One is the areas of color are definitely not small enough for your eye to blend at a reasonable distance. The second is, I think the colors themselves are actually not complementary colors. If you look closely, I'm going to use the sort of yellowish and blue color combination. I suspect that if you actually mix those two colors together on a palette, you would get something that's maybe more green than brown. Why is that? I'm not totally sure, but I have a couple of guesses. I think it was either human error or computer error, or most likely kind of both. I don't think this is an exact match to the color that I entered on the website. I think the website gave me its sort of closest guess. The other thing is, I'm not really a painter. That's not where my experience lies. So I think there was probably some error on my part mixing the colors. Between those two things, I think the colors on the canvas actually ended up being somewhat different than the colors that I had picked out online. The other thing I think is that maybe your eye just doesn't mix colors the way they mix on a palette, right? So I think there is also a scientific side to why this didn't work. I could do some things to maybe get a closer effect to where I was going for, and I think there's still enough potential in this idea that I will probably revisit it in the future. But for right now, I am tired of putting dots on canvas. I am sure you guys are also tired of watching me put dots on canvas. So I think I'm going to take a little bit of a break from our divisionism, pointillism experiment. But for now, that's all I got. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking with me through the whole process. I had a lot of fun. I think it was a pretty cool project. I like the way the painting turned out. So Thank you for being with me for this first video.